Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to the next episode of A Conversation with Cometan. This is episode 9 of season 2, and today we are joined by a very interesting individual who I've spoken to on a previous episode. Actually, he joined us for back in April for a get-together of like-minded people, of course, about space. And today he's joining me again. We've got Stephen Wolfe here today, who is the president of the Beyond Earth Institute. Good afternoon, Stephen. It's afternoon here in the UK. I hope you're doing well, and I hope that you're ready to talk about space.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning for me. I'm talking to you from New York City, of course.
Yes, yeah. Brilliant. So yeah, let's just get straight into it, I suppose. Just tell me a little bit about sort of your background and sort of why have you got into this, this sort of space philosophy, space exploration, advocacy and activism. How did you get here, basically?
Sure. I definitely connected with your message, Cometan, that having a strong experience at a very young age, or I guess in my teens.
Yeah.
Like a lot of kids, I grew up during the Apollo era. And I was 9 years old when Apollo landed on the moon. And, it was certainly, was a very, powerful experience. But it wasn't until I was in my teens that I read the book I came across the work of Gerard O'Neill, who promoted the concept that humans would actually have an opportunity to live and develop new branches of civilization beyond Earth. And that is when the vision really gripped me, when I really actually began having some kind of transformational experiences. And really it began from there, and it blossomed in high school, and then in high school. And that was one of those things where I was, of course, like a lot of people, maybe even yourself, have entertained ideas that I would become an astronaut.
Yes.
Although I was good in math, I wasn't that fantastic. And I remember having a conversation with my guidance counselor at the time.
Yeah.
And, he said, well, I'm not sure, you should think about your career. And I said to him at the time, I don't care, even if I have to sweep the floors at NASA, I'd be willing to do that as long as I could be part of the space community.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was that principle that more or less guided my career. At the same time that I was exploring, I guess you would say, spiritual dimension of my life as well.
Yes.
And so they were very much parallel interests, I would say, not necessarily converged, but were parallel for many years. I started meditating in high school. In college, I learned how to do TM, transcendental meditation.
Yes.
I was involved in a few meditation groups along the way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I went to Capitol Hill after graduation, and that's where I began my career in space policy. So it's really keeping one foot in a very concrete world of space development. What can we do to make this future a reality?
Yes.
And the other part of me is sort of exploring the nature of consciousness, opening up myself to what other realms might be possible beyond the physical realm, having a real curiosity about that. And then, of course, the story of the book, The Obligation, occurred when I was actually in my early 40s. And I was on a meditation retreat, and I had as can happen, and I don't want to make this out to be too woo-woo. I mean, when you go on a retreat, it's basically an opportunity to step back, to contemplate about what's important, and so forth. But you're also in deep meditation, which is also allows you to be have a higher state of consciousness. It basically it kind of makes your consciousness a little bit more porous to other realms and so forth, and it's an opportunity, creates a tremendous opportunity for insight. And that's really what happened to me in that moment, on that in 2002, where I had a pretty transformational experience of recognizing that that everything that humans have done in terms of developing our technological capability, from the moment that we first developed tools, or put a pointy rock on the end of a stick and used it for hunting, all the way up through our ability to build rockets, has been very deliberate and intentional. So this was not it was not a matter of random selection and trial. It was very much trial and error. It was an evolutionary process, but it was an evolutionary process that had very clear direction to it. And the purpose of that, amongst other things, I don't want to overstate this necessarily, but a clear point of all this technological development that we have been part of, right? We have been, it has been an outgrowth so that we could carry the seeds of human life and life in general to other planetary shores. And so that was the, that's sort of the short answer. But but this is a philosophical dimension, right?
Yes.
So after that, it was a question. I had spent about 8 years developing that germ of an idea into a philosophical framework that I articulated in the obligation. So, so I expand upon that. That was the germ, and then I expanded upon that. I tried to work backwards a little bit, say, okay, well, if this is our purpose, then how do we know that? And that's where I came up with this concept of endowments, that we possess 7 endowments that I articulate in the book, that if you look at them, they do 2 things. And so they enabled us to live and thrive on this planet. And they also allowed us to come to the brink where we are right now, where we can actually expand human life beyond Earth. So the endowments are I'll just read them.
Yes, please.
And you can interpret. Yes. And I'm sorry, I'm just, I'm lecturing now, and I apologize. If you want to stop me and, and have more dialogue, I'm sorry.
I've got so many questions. But no, please carry on just for a little bit. Yeah.
So just to just to carry on. So the endowments. So it's pretty straightforward, and you probably can interpret them. So I won't give you an interpretation, but the endowments include the wanderer, explorer, the settler, we settle, the inventor, the builder, the visionary, the protector, and then finally something that I'm introducing. So all those you might be, you could think about them and probably come up with a definition. But then I have an endowment that I call the conscious evolver. And this is relatively new, and I'll just dwell on this just a little bit, because it has to do with our evolution of consciousness, right? So all these other ones are sort of part of who we are, or part of, at least of somebody that we know, or that we know of in terms of history and so forth, so we can identify these archetypes. We recognize these. But the idea of a conscious evolver is sort of the next stage, and it ties directly into this notion of heightened human consciousness that many of us feel that many are moving into. And this is the idea that we are moving into the future consciously, right? So up until now, the evolution of life on Earth and humanity has been largely unconscious. It just sort of happened, especially the evolution of technology. It just happened. People think this is a good idea, that's a good idea, not realizing that there's sort of an underlying pattern that we're essentially living into. But now we have to become a conscious participant in that in the ongoing transformation. So we haven't reached the end of anything. We're not necessarily going to reach the end of anything at all ever. And it's all a process of an increasing unfolding, and that we can't even envision. Frankly, Cometan, you and I can't even envision what that future is going to be. And it's just this, but it does involve us to go from evolving unconsciously to evolving consciously. And we do see that around us, and we could talk about examples and so forth. So, so let me just stop there. There are other bits and so forth, but let me stop there and give you a chance to probe or
there's quite a few things that I've just picked up on. One of them was this idea I found interesting about the dichotomy between, you could say, space politics, really, couldn't you? And sort of the more sort of philosophical and sort of spiritual dimensions of this area that we're both in. There is so much noise, and I spoke about this last week on another podcast about, yes, there is so much happening in space at the moment, and different governments getting involved, and do they have the right intentions? This is all politics, isn't it? And this is, very, very important to the sort of practical, realistic sort of endeavors of going into outer space. But of course, at the same time, I also feel like that's taken over as well, the conversation a lot. And I think I was saying this last week that, with my work in astronism, what I want to do is try and bring us back to sort of that, in a way, not in a primitive way, but just bring us back to that purer state where we do we explore outer space for the right reasons, but also in a more personal sense as well. And this is what I see as the sort of philosophical, spiritual dimensions. So I tend not to get involved too much at this stage. Maybe later on in my life I might do, in the sort of the space politics area. I want to just kind of promote at this stage sort of this idea of, I don't know, getting it back to the individual person, getting it back to, I don't know, trying to answer some of these fundamental questions of why are we actually going, rather than just, I don't know, just trying to pin down some of these things and trying to make it, I don't know, relevant to sort of everyday people. Because of course I come across a lot of people who don't see space really as relevant to them. They don't see it as sort of I suppose they just don't have the same connection to space than what we do, of course. But I'm trying to reach out to those people and saying that, yes, space is so important to not only just your physical life, your survival, but also there is a definite philosophical and spiritual dimension there. So that was one thing I picked up from just one of the sentences you said, which is this dichotomy between, the political current things that are taking place and all the noise that takes place in that area, and then this sort of more this sort of more philosophical approach, this exploring of space exploration in a more spiritual way, you could say. And then also, I think we definitely share some connection to the astronomical world. Definitely from, again, I've felt this from the age of 15, which is relatively late actually for some other people that I know who felt it since they were, children. So, but there's definitely something here. There's definitely something that obviously we feel, and everyone else who is involved in space definitely feels a draw, feels some sort of connection to space exploration. And of course, those things definitely channel into different areas. Of course, I've channeled my work so far into astronism and this system that I'm trying to build, really. But again, it's a process, isn't it? And, you know, as you've developed through your career so far, I'm sure I'll do the same, hopefully. But sort of one question that I did have for you was, with your work now that you're doing with the Beyond Earth Institute, what is that, and what is the sort of goal of that, and what is the, you could say, are you trying to sort of promote a more philosophical approach to space, or is it more sort of, I don't know, is it more political? I don't know. Just explain what that is, I suppose.
Well, sure. And I think it may be, in a way, I could go back to say that moment of insight in 2002. I began work on the book. I began writing. Actually, shortly after that, I started publishing articles in different space-related magazines,
Yes.
Basically speaking from the philosophical dimension of this. I'd already been involved with the space advocacy community for quite some time. Even as I said, even in when I got to the Hill in the 1980s, when I was on the Hill in the 1980s, had this passion for this notion that humankind must begin the process of migration into space. And it was at that time, I think I might have mentioned in the last call, that I created or wrote a bill for my then congressman boss called the Space Settlement Act of 1988, and which he introduced, and which ultimately was signed into law as part of the NASA authorization bill of that year. And it was very well received within the space advocacy community. Unfortunately, it wasn't very well received in the at NASA and some other space industry circles.
Right.
Didn't quite know what to make of it, because then it was, can we? And frankly, it was introduced at a time before. It was during the time after the Challenger accident. And the shuttle hadn't yet resumed flight yet. We introduced this bill. So it seemed the idea of space settlement seemed so far in the future. And it's to a certain extent, it still does.
Yes.
But I felt it was important that we pursue that. And the power of not letting some idea of, well, no, people aren't going to go along with that, don't really try that. And I got a lot of people saying, don't get your boss to do this. Don't pursue this. If you're going to do it, change the name. Don't call it space settlement, call it space, something else, because don't be so specific. And I stuck to my guns. My boss was a visionary himself. I mean, unlike a lot of the people in Congress now, he was very much a visionary, and he let me, he introduced it, let me run with it. The advocacy community came together and helped push it through. So that was in 1988. Then I had this revelation of sorts, and I thought for a little while that I was going to be a little bit like you, that I was going to be basically a space philosopher at that point. And I started doing some talks, and I did some writing, and I worked on the book and so forth. But somewhere after the book came out, in the early, in I think 2012 or 2013, finally, I realized I started thinking, well, that the philosophy side of it could be one dimension of the work that I was doing, but I became intrigued by the kind of the work on the roll up your sleeves kind of work that needs to be done to make that future happen. So there's one thing inspiring people as to the why, maybe the underlying, you could call it spiritual dimension or underlying dimension that is motivating us. I call it the evolutionary impulse that resides with, that courses through the universe, that has a degree of intelligence that, to a certain extent, we're adhering to it, although we're not necessarily conscious of it. So, and it's pushing us or nudging us, I'd say, in a certain direction. And I think it quite clearly is nudging us towards becoming a spacefaring civilization. But even with that, there is work to be done, right? So we still have to, maybe about 8 years or so ago, I started looking at this, and I see that there are 3 pillars if we're going to become a spacefaring, or I should say a multiplanetary species. The 3 dimensions that need to be addressed. One is the technology, obviously. If we don't have the technology, we're not going to be able to do it. It's very important. The second is the financing. We're talking about something, if we're going to put up a colony of people, 100,000, 1 million people, you're talking about an incredibly expensive undertaking. Even for the first one, the first habitat, even if it's 50 or 100 people, you're still talking about, 100 billion plus type of a project. And then the third leg is policy, because you have to have, the government has to be on board with it. And ideally, you want the government to be saying, oh, we encourage it.
Yes.
And to be supporting it, and to have set it as a national goal and so forth. So I decided that what I needed to do was to get back into this on the policy side. And that's what the Beyond Earth Institute really is. Okay. So several years ago, I organized a seminar, a one-day seminar that we called the Policy Forum on Space Settlement. And I invited a series of speakers who spoke about various dimensions of space policy that could help us get closer and closer to space migration, a space migration future. That came off extremely well. I was very surprised. And out of that came a cohort of individuals, about 5 of us, that decided we wanted to continue taking this further. And ultimately, about a year later, we then decided that less than a year later, we decided that we would incorporate and that we would create an organization around this effort. So unlike any other space policy organization or space-oriented or science-oriented think tank, our primary focus are policies that will help to advance us towards a space settlement future. So we put that really right out there. That is our focus. And so there are very specific things that we see that we could be doing. So we engage in webinars, which you might have seen. We engage in mainly research and analysis and making recommendations. And some of those can have a lot of good near-term benefits, such as improving restrictions on companies who want to sell goods, technology goods to other countries. This is important if you're looking to build an international space, an international space habitat of some kind. So, but it also has a lot of implications for across the space industry. And then we also look at things like setting new goals for space migration, looking at the growth of the humans in space. So we look at, to a certain extent, this is a numbers game, as I'm coming to see it. So the number of people in space is the indicator, right? So right now we have maybe 10 astronauts on the International Space Station. We're going to have we're going to have some space tourists. Soon we're going to be going to the moon and supposedly setting up a base there through NASA's efforts, the international efforts. So you'll see a steady climb of the number of people that are in space at any one time or traveling to space in a particular year. And And so there will be, so we have to be honest. It's not going to be like this. Okay, we'll decide to build a space station, space colony, and then the numbers will jump like this. It'll probably be a gradual process of increasing comfort level of people going to space through space tourism, or as private researchers, certainly through NASA's programs, and ESA has programs. Obviously, China has their own plans, and so forth. So, so it is. So we are looking at all of this, yes. And we're looking at where are the opportunities where we can influence policy in a way that would speed up the time that we have a permanent community beyond Earth that's economically self-sustaining and self-governing, right? And it's very important. And how close is that to where we are right now? So we do an interesting thing at the end of each one of our webinars. We ask our panelists, when do you think that we'll have the first colony, or as we call it, community beyond Earth? When do you think we'll have the first community beyond Earth? And it's fascinating responses, from anywhere from 75 years to 20. Last one we just had was 25 years from now, which wow. is awesome. Wow. Up to 10 years from now, because that's the stated goal of Elon Musk. Well, he's not someone that you could just ignore. So if he says that, we have to take that seriously. So anyway, that in a nutshell, that's kind of what the Beyond Earth Institute is about. And we are engaging the industry. We're engaging the agencies, government agency, international agencies, as well as Congress and other policy-making bodies. So it's one of these things where you have your philosophical viewpoint, and it imbues your decision-making process as you go forward, but you're not necessarily expounding upon it. I tend to make declarative statements that that humanity is on a path towards expanding into space, and we as a society need to simply accept that, right? So that's what I am saying in the context of Beyond Earth, and I repeat that over and over again.
Yeah, so much to pick on here.
Sorry, I'm playing.
No, all right, it's great, it's brilliant. I just had a few questions. So, what degree then do you think that government should be involved in the overall endeavor? Do you think they should have a very sort of, from what I've gathered, that you think it should be a very, very, very much involved in the whole endeavor of space exploration? And also, where does this idea of the democratization of it come in? Is there a sort of, are we looking at this nationally, or are we looking at this universally? What way can we realistically approach this? I know that obviously mine and a lot of other people's sort of idealistic approach is to take a sort of universal, this is everyone's, but is that realistic? Or are we really, in reality at the moment, still looking from a very nationalistic point of view, when we have people, obviously we've got China on this side, we've got the US on the other, we've got sort of Europe in the middle in a way, Russia as well, of course. So we're still very much divided along national lines. I don't know, what's your opinion on just that whole topic there?
Yeah, no, it's very challenging, and from my, from a philosophical standpoint, it's unfortunate that that's the reality that we're in right now. There's, I would say, right now it's with China, for example, it's a competitive orientation. Some people think that China right now is a threat. They could become a threat. I don't think that they are a threat to national security, and that's always the concern. And that's, we are, again, it does get back to this sort of evolution of consciousness, and can we move beyond the current nature of geopolitics? Obviously, in the United States, we clearly have taken a step back. I'll just say that in many ways, in the context of moving away from democracy, there is a concern that we may become a more autocratic society. I don't know what that will mean. Obviously that's an anathema to the very nature of the American experiment. So we have to be clear-eyed in that the world is as it is, right?
Yes.
The world is as it is, and therefore, and then there are forces at work seeking to take for themselves and to whatever you want to call it, whether it's greed or desire for power. You see these situations, even in Israel, which I'm a big supporter of Israel, but you have a leader there that is so identified with his power and leading that nation that he just could not see a world where he was not the head of that country, and that's, to me, I don't think that that's very healthy. Any leader should be able, and we saw that, of course, with Trump, where he was not willing to give up, and still, and not that I don't want to get too deep into that politics there, but we do live in a somewhat tumultuous moment in history in many ways. I think that we need to continue to do what we do. We can't. We cannot continue to do what we do, and hopefully what we do can be a source of bringing together like-minded individuals from around the world, and that's certainly our intention. We sort of see this process of evolving beyond this planet as one of it is a human activity.
Yes.
Right. We humans are endowed with the capability of doing this, and it. Yeah, but the reality is, we are focused on. We're not looking to. And this is from beyond, for very practical reasons. Beyond Earth is not looking to engage with China or Russia, for example, in what we're doing. We're focusing on the U.S. and our close allies in Europe in our efforts, and then hopefully, along the way, there can be joint bilateral agreements with China. There's no reason why there shouldn't be. Outer space is, let's face it, the resources of the solar system are certainly plentiful enough for all nations of Earth to enjoy peacefully, and so we look. So that's really our orientation.
Yeah. Just a few things from me was, I think for me, I do kind of see China as a threat, really, just because I'm involved in the human rights field. So at the moment, I'm doing my PhD in freedom of religion. And the reason why I see them as a threat is because I don't think that they're on the same playing field as us in terms of, I think they've just got totally different understandings of what is acceptable and the way to treat a human being. And I just think that with space, that type of attitude will be extended beyond into space if they continue in their efforts. And that's the only thing that just worries me, really, just from that really basic level. Not even getting into the politics. Human rights should not be involved in politics at all. It is beyond politics. But again, it's that's the main issue for me, is that are they going to extend those policies? For example, it's policies on religion at the moment, and of course we all know what's taking place to the Muslims there in that country. Will that extend to the plans that they have for communities beyond Earth? I presume it does. I presume that in their policies, that extension to what people can believe, to what type of information people can receive within their community, it will be censored. It will be it will be restricted very much. So that's the main issue that I have with not just China, but any country really that doesn't place freedom really at the forefront. And then also, of course, I think more and more people are getting, what's the word to use? Not doubtful, but just sort of, and not even sort of maybe a little bit of suspiciousness, but just you're just a little bit of worried about the private sector elements of this. Are they going into space for the right reasons? Are they going into space for the same reasons as, I don't know, as the people that I know? Because I don't know, I don't know Elon Musk, I don't know Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson, of course, but I just don't know if they're going into space for the same reasons. And I just question whether that will have very significant detrimental things later on. And yes, it is a very tumultuous time. I think it should be in a way, because this time, I think, is going to, as you probably know, it will define really, possibly centuries in the future, the decisions that we make now. I think really we're at the cusp really of deciding how we're going to go into space, and yes, future generations will be affected by our decisions. I mean, we've just had the G7 summit just now, and just look at it from a sort of environmentalistic point of view. Those decisions that were made there in the last few days or so are going to affect future generations, and it's the same for space. I don't think we should see space in a sort of bubble. I don't think it's brought up enough either at a lot of these conferences. It is not a conversation that they seem to be having. I know, of course, you'll know Adriano and Giulio and those people from the previous, when we last spoke to each other. They see some of the environmentalists as sort of degrowthists and people who are trying to scale back our activities. Space is a human activity. It requires growth. We can't go into space if we don't continue economic growth, because we need the economic growth to fuel space activity. So again, there is a little bit of collision there, perhaps. I'm not sure. I'd like to get your opinion on that. But just going back to China again, that's just the concern that I have. And will those policies be extended to communities that are beyond space? And yeah, it just shows, ultimately, getting to my point, it just shows that really space and its exploration involve every aspect of human life, because we're going up into space and we're going to take all these problems with us. We're going to take all the issues that come with human life with us. So, we need to not see space in a sort of vacuum, really. It is very much involved in everything, really. But I don't know, what's your view on those types of things?
No, you raise a few points there, very important points also. It also shows that you're clearly in tune with the geopolitics as well. So I know you're not just sitting in a cave meditating.
No, so and I don't want it to come across as that. It's just that sometimes when I get very frustrated with the political side, yes, I do go into sort of internalizing and just sort of, go back to sort of that primitive side and just looking up at the stars and just enjoying stargazing. I don't want it to come across as though I'm not involved in the political side or not interested in that, of course. But yeah,
we want to act. You want to act in the world from a place, from a subtle space, right? From a place of being.
Yeah.
So, and that's always a bit of the challenge. So you bring up a few points. Yes, China. There are people within my cohort that feel China is a threat, and that and are very concerned, exactly as you say, that they have certain notions about governance and human rights that we don't want to have replicated. We don't want to see that expand out into space. And there is a feeling that there is a bit of a race going on, that if the Chinese, get a foothold first, then they will dominate the culture in space, and if U.S. gets there, and I think that's a real concern for sure.
Yeah.
The other side is the private sector involvement, and to a certain extent, Elon is he's way ahead of us. I think that the space community, space policy, unfortunately, is going to be playing catch up with him. I mean, once he has that Starship flying and operational, it's such a game changer.
Yeah. I just want to interject there, is that in a way, I trust him more than the governments to some degree, because, and that's why I've sort of got two minds about it. I do trust the private activity because I believe in that. I believe in sort of that open economy and really approaching it from that perspective. And that's why I asked you before about to what degree should government be involved? Should this really be a government activity if we're going to be taking, if it's going to cause all these problems between the political side, should it really just be more focused on the private side? And maybe that's where it is naturally heading towards with Elon and the work he's actually doing, is that really he's demonstrated that he and those around him can progress far beyond what any government can really do at this stage. Maybe that's just showing that private is the one of a possible resolution to some of these more political issues that are taking place. I don't know.
Well, no, it's hard to be critical of Elon and Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, especially, his path, at least, in getting turned on to space, he's very much a Gerard O'Neill fan, as I was.
Yeah.
When Jeff Bezos was in college, he ran a space group very much like the one I ran when I was in college. So, it's something that's a guiding principle of his life as it is mine. So, and you raise a good point. I think when Beyond Earth is looking at policy, it is just enough. It's policy that enables the future to the extent that it possibly can. It's certainly part of that policy is leveraging to the maximum extent possible the private sector in this. There is a dimension sort of similar to China, that there should be certain principles by which, as people expand into space, principles by which that everyone agrees to adhere to, and certainly the principles of human rights should be accepted and practiced rigorously by anyone, including Elon Musk. I mean, we have no idea what his intentions are, and unfortunately, they get a lot of Elon and Bezos get a lot of bad press on how they treat their employees. So certainly we don't want that to extend necessarily to any kind of habitats that they might create. But I think it's a delicate balance. I think that there is an important role for government, both in terms of making sure that it's done correctly and that it's done and it goes beyond simply a Mars colony created by Mars, right? So it's a much bigger mission here, and I do think that Elon should not just be the king of Mars. I mean, I think it'll be great when he sets up that colony, but it'll also be great when there's another colony and another colony and another colony, and they evolve into cities, and they evolve into significant branches of civilization on Mars and on the moon and in free space. So it's a big future, and I think that we can accelerate it, and it should be done so properly, and in a way that because potentially you could see, we don't want Elon's experiment, let's just call it that. If he experiments with a colony on Mars and it fails, that can't just be it. We keep hearing, and God forbid if anything happened to Elon, then that whole, that would just go away. There would be no one. He's choosing to make that gamble and putting his treasure on the line to that, but not, if anything happens to him, whoever his successor is not gonna, because there's no logic, there's no economic or financial logic in what he's doing. And that's what's so brilliant about it, of course. But the other flip side of that is that it's all him. It's all on him, So we do have to pray that he just stays healthy for a good long time. So we do need him. Yeah.
And of course, that sort of relates to the idea that you do need these charismatic leaders sometime to kind of cultivate this movement in a way, to cultivate these different movements and ideas and developments. Interesting that you were talking about the maybe some type of agreements to these sort of principles. That's sort of the bane of my life at the moment, because I'm looking at sort of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on this hand, and sort of all the different countries that have signed up to that declaration, but that are not fulfilling those promises. So again, just because someone does sign up to it doesn't mean that they're going to fulfill that, of course. So again, that needs we need to think about that really. But one thing I wanted to ask you was that I don't see right now, and this might be just my lack of knowledge at the moment, but I've not seen at the moment any type of I know there are conventions about space, but is there anything happening at the moment, I don't know, in relation to the United Nations or something, where there's going to be, I don't know, countries coming together to really try and resolve some of these issues that are still up in the air? I've not heard anything yet about it. Are countries going to come together and try and, I don't know, come to some sort of consensus on some of these things? Because for the last few years since I've been involved in this, there's been conversations, there's been topics taking place and things, but it all seems still very up in the air. I don't know if you know more than me about whether there is anything taking place. I don't know.
What topic? You're talking about human rights? Or you're talking about space-related things?
Space related, just all these different things. I know that there are, even with of course there are space conventions, aren't there, that we have established, but have they been extended to Mars yet? I presume that they've been extended to the moon, and just things like asteroid mining and things like that. Have there been any kinds of conventions that have been sort of universally agreed upon? I'm not sure if there have been. I don't know. Might not be able to answer. I don't know.
There are a few interesting things, if I follow you right. So there's probably the biggest thing that, and actually was the subject of our first webinar last year, and an area that we're working on. So NASA, you might be familiar with, issued the Artemis Cords.
Yes.
These are 8 or 10 principles that would govern, that the signatory governments would agree to adhere to. There are about 8 or 9 countries so far that have signed on to it.
Okay.
And these are general principles about behavior, about sort of the rights of each country to utilize the resources in space.
Yeah.
Whether it's mining or setting up a base. It's about trying to standardize components so that one component from one country could be used for another country, say in the case of an emergency situation. Search and rescue provisions saying that if if one space habitat, for example, is in distress, a nearby, partnering would agree that they would do whatever they could to help to save the individuals and so forth, that sort of thing. So there's that kind of things, and the Artemis Accords, of course, is a multilateral agreement. It is not a treaty, and that's really been so. We do have international space law, and through the UN. The UN does have an active committee on the peaceful uses of outer space. They do have regular meetings. There is generally a understanding that significant space treaties probably would not come out of the UN just because of how slow that they move, and there really isn't anything on the table, and the dynamics of the United Nations these days isn't really lend itself to that. So therefore, any progress that's going to be made is going to be made through activities such as bilateral or multilateral protocols that that are represented certainly in the Artemis Accords. One of the things Beyond Earth is saying, okay, well, these accords are good. Let's see how we can expand upon these to be more conscious of the eventual creation of communities beyond Earth, and how can we use the accords to help to promote that? So we're working on a recommendation for adding additional provisions to that. So and that's sort of one way how we would work. I think does that kind of answer what you're asking?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I think it definitely shows as well the realities of where we're at right now. And I think, I mean, it's all great work that is taking place, and I'm not one of these people who thinks that it all is going to happen or all should happen within even my lifetime. I mean, I'm nearly 23, so
it will. You will have an opportunity. I guarantee it. You will have an opportunity to go to a space settlement before you die.
Yeah.
I see that.
That's brilliant.
I'm very spiritual, so I see that. I see the future.
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope that's true. Of course, there are people that I know who, they regard the next 10 years, if something doesn't happen in the next 10 years, then we will lose that opportunity. I don't know if you probably have considered that before, that do we have a type of window here really between, where we are right now and sort of a point of no return in many senses. Do you sort of subscribe to that idea, or?
Yeah, I do, and I've heard even Elon has said that there's a window. I do think that there's a window, although I think that we are. I see signs that we are going to sort of make it through. Again, the big thing would be that, again, a lot of these linchpins, rely on, is whether Elon can, if something would happen to Elon, for example, that would be, I mean, obviously anything can happen.
Yes.
That can knock us back down. I think the fact that we are
transitioning
from a government-led to more a commercially led expansion, especially as it relates to human activity. So, commercial is very involved with the satellite industry, and that's very healthy on its own, $300 billion industry, communication satellites, and so forth. And now we're going to see Earth observation satellites are going to come on. That's going to bring us up to $1 trillion. But the game for us, of course, is the human dimension and the growth of human activity in space. Now, that still is somewhat nascent. Again, I think the success of Starship, and it does have to succeed, and I guess that's not a guarantee. But if Starship can succeed, then that would be a game changer, because it drives down the the cost of getting into space to under $100 a pound. It allows you to, and then it opens the door for just hundreds and hundreds of people to travel to space on a regular basis, and all kinds of activity. Whether Elon gets to Mars or not, it's still, even if it takes him 20 years or 30 years, it's still his opened the door. And once that door is open, I don't see us closing that, especially if that technology could be replicated, which it should be. I mean, I'd love for Elon, I've talked about this before in other podcasts, if he would open the IP for the Starship the way he did with the Tesla IP, just to say, hey, if you can replicate this, go for it. Yeah. It just, and already because of the success of his last test launch of the rocket, there's extreme interest in that vehicle. So, and of course, NASA is wholeheartedly behind it, and they've named the Starship as the lunar lander for the Artemis program. So, very exciting there. It looks like we're coming to the end of the hour, so I wanted to, I do need to sign off here. I know I could talk for hours on this stuff.
I just wanted to cover just a few last topics before we finish.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my main area of interest really is human activity, I suppose, and whether that be in a secular sense or a more religious, philosophical sense. And I think I'm going to ask you in a minute what your next sort of projects are, I suppose. But I suppose the way I'm seeing sort of my interest lead to is really working in that human rights field with space integrated into that. So looking at, what are the rights of the person in space, essentially. That's where I am heading towards. I feel I really want to try and make some contributions in whatever way I can to that field, and it's something that sort of merges my two interests together: human activity, human rights in outer space. So that's an area that I'm interested in. If you know anyone, or if you know any good books on that, or I'd be interested to get as much knowledge from you about that as much as I can. But yeah, what type of projects, or I suppose, depending on how long you plan ahead, but what are the next things for you and your institute, but also you as a person as well? Where do you see your interest going into, and the projects coming up for you?
Yeah, we are, the Beyond Earth Institute is still fairly formative. We have a range of, we're writing papers, we're conducting webinars, we're planning, we just launched a research project on financing. How do you pay for it? And so we're looking at various models. The norms of behavior, and that's sort of the rubric underneath which human rights would fall into, is an important area of what we do. And I wouldn't say that we've really delved into that dimension as much yet. When you engage with something like this, the field of activity is very broad.
Yeah.
I was just on a very interesting call. I was invited to speak last week on a call, and people were very interested in this notion of parity of who is going to have the opportunity to go into space. Was it just going to be for rich people? And could there be a way, or a requirement, I guess, that everyone go? And there is this idea, maybe you've heard of it, and I've heard of it before the call last week, about that space access should be a right, just like many other things we have a right, should have a right. Now, I don't know how you translate that into some sort of operational policy, because obviously something could be a right, but it still costs a lot of money. So how do you translate that into?
Yeah.
So but I like the concept, and I see that as one area that we will be delving into. Human rights, I think, are very important to our mission.
Yes.
Globally, and I would imagine it will put forth either put our support behind some existing principle, or perhaps even engage in a discussion and research on the topic itself that will lead towards a recommendation that we could make, and maybe that's where we could collaborate. Potential.
Yeah, in the future, definitely that'd be great, because I think it merges those two interests together, and without those human rights, without those fundamental freedoms, we're going to go into space and not know how to how to sort of interact with each other, or what the right thing is to do. So we need those fundamental bases first.
Well, I'll just add if I could.
Yes.
And this actually gets back to the philosophical nature of things. I do articulate this somewhat in my book, that there's kind of, as we kind of evolve consciously, the notion of, and I think I related this a little bit in the talk we were on together. So this idea that as we evolve our consciousness, we recognize that we're creatures of the universe, right? Universal humans. But the flip side is, as we actually physically go out there, that influences human consciousness for everyone who remains at home. And I think that was true during the Apollo era.
Okay.
I don't think it was no secret that seeing the entire world, the picture of the entire globe, helped to stimulate the environmental movement and put it into overdrive. And we understood at that moment that we were all one people on this planet. You couldn't see any borders and so forth. And astronauts over and over again talk about having this overview effect. And because all humanity is connected, that influence, that overview effect that astronauts felt, affects everyone on Earth. So there's so as we evolve, as we evolve consciously, we recognize that space, that we are part of space, and as we go into space, it helps to stimulate that. So there's a sort of a feedback loop, if you will. And so that's a long way of saying is, my hope is that this exercise, physically going into space, especially going to the moon and developing communities beyond Earth, in and of itself will help to raise our collective consciousness in a way that is more humanistic and responsive to all kinds of the human rights, and consistent with human rights across the board, even for China. Frankly, I think even it may even very well have a transformative effect on them as well. So. Yeah.
Let's hope so. That's a brilliant way to end our little discussion here. I hope that we can have more in the future. I'm sure that we will stay in contact now with each other. It's great to have these conversations and just to share ideas and continue on with the discourse. So thanks, Stephen, for joining me today. You've been watching A Conversation with Cometan, and I'll see you in the next episode, which will be episode 10. So see everybody.